And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Conversations Live and Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us. For those tuning in on the radio side at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com, we're glad that you all can be with us. Also, those tuning in through iHeartRadio and Amazon Music, we're glad you all could be with us as well. We're excited to welcome Kelly Sather to our broadcast today. She's written a really fun book that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. It is not only, I think, entertaining, but also it's in some ways reflective as well as we kind of read through the different stories she's given us. The book is called Small in Real Life. You guys can see it there. Want to let you guys know how to get your own copy of the book, as well as how you can stay connected with Kelly as well. Kelly, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's so great to be here with you.
Oh, the pleasure is definitely all mine. I should let our audience know that's joining us on camera. This was totally unplanned, but Kelly is a trooper, and she decided that we're going to do a 2-for-1 here, one for radio and one for our own camera audience as well. So, Kelly, I appreciate that. So, first of all, congratulations on Small in Real Life. That's a great story in itself, but there are other stories in this book. Kelly, what has it been like for you to see the way that readers are responding to it?
It's been fantastic. I think as writers, we spend so much time working on the project, and then to have a chance to talk to readers about it. I think at some of the readings to hear people laugh, that's been really lovely. I mean, I think it's funny, but I'm often reading it over and over again. So to hear that has been great. And then I've discovered things about the book that I hadn't realized as I talk about it.
Interesting. Well, there's a lot of interesting things, as I mentioned in my intro. It is entertaining, but I think there are some very reflective and inflective messages, I think, that kind of come throughout in the book as well. For myself, I mean, just kind of to name off a couple, in the story Small in Real Life, the idea of how sometimes we can put people on pedestals, right? Remembering that we all are just people. But even another story in the book kind of talks about, even though it is dealing with literal judgment, how the idea of judging, that how that goes for us as human beings as well. So I'm curious, how did it all begin for you? You have these stories. How did this project first begin for you?
Well, it started with one story, and I wasn't thinking about writing a book. I think
Okay.
at the time I was trying to write a story as thoughtfully and with as much interest for the reader. I often think it's an interesting process because I'm not thinking about the reader as much as I am thinking like, what can this sentence do? And knowing that I'm writing a short story, which is a form that you don't have that many pages. And so oftentimes I am really thinking like, how much can this sentence do? And how are these characters in conflict with one another? Pretty much on every page. And that's how I develop the story. And so when I started with one story. I didn't know that I would be returning to Southern California, but that is really an imaginative space that was really rich for me. And I found myself going back to, I think there were things that I had observed growing up and working there that had just stayed with me that felt like they had a lot of potential for just to see where they would lead.
Yeah. I think one of the things that does come out, I think, as a thread throughout the books is the idea of trying to move past something, Kelly, right? Whether, I mean, I think all of us kind of have a thing about escapism. We all have our own form of that. I think the characters in this book really show that sometimes we are trying to escape to something we perceive to be better than what we have, but may actually not be. It really is about perspective. So I'm curious, based on what you just said, then, did it give you more freedom since you knew they were going to be short stories to not feel like it had to be a certain length or that you had to take it certain places, knowing that each story was going to be limited in its scope?
Yes, I think that's true. I love reading novels and really hadn't read that many short stories until right before I started to write them. I think when I decided to turn to fiction, I wasn't really sure what I could do. And so I thought, well, we should start as small as possible. And so that's kind of where I was. And part of that was that impression of like, gosh, a novel feels unwieldy. It feels like, how does one hold that? How does one hold that? And how do you know where you end up going? I wasn't quite ready for that kind of a project yet. And a story, I think also there's a certain darkness and power in short stories that I really enjoyed just as a writer, I had always read growing up mysteries and thrillers. And so I kind of, even though not all stories are that way, there is this page turning unexpectedness to it that I felt that I related to that. Like my sort of tempo as a reader and a writer at the time felt like geared towards that.
Yeah, love that. And I think too, you're able to give us these different snippets of life, right? And really, I think in showing us too, again, how, as I mentioned earlier about that thread, how interconnected we are. You said that one of the things that's been happening for you, Kelly, is that you're realizing things about it too. Was that though something that you knew going in, that you wanted to create these separate adventures, so to speak, but also kind of have them connected in some way?
So no, like I did not know that they would connect. I think at
Okay.
some point I had written so many stories, and as often happens with me, it's a kind friend who says, "Oh, I think you have a book here." And so then I started to really look at it and realize, wow, like this Southern California framework and this sort of yearning felt very consistent in the stories, and then the humor felt consistent.
Mhm.
And so they kind of formed a book in that way on their own. I think one thing that I've realized as I've talked about the book is the sort of buried anger in some of it, which I think breeds a lot of
Mhm.
humor, that sort of simmering, how's this going to explode? And that sort of like, as we do with humor, which I think is so beautiful about it, like tells a lot of truth and also kind of deflects at the same time.
Right.
So that's kind of how the book came together. And then once I started to really work on it as a manuscript on these 9 stories, they felt, it wasn't so much, I mean, I have edited them since when they were published, several of them were published in literary journals before the book.
Yeah.
So those have been edited, but it wasn't like I edited them to go with the others. I think that they kind of, I discovered they had more of a flow than I realized, which makes sense because I'm the writer. And I also, when I'm working, I tend to move between projects because I just find I never really like that idea of putting a project in a drawer and forgetting about it for a while. I sort of am like, I worked so hard on it. Like, I don't want to just leave it, and think that it might not make it or whatever
Right.
making it means. I don't know, but I just had that feeling. So oftentimes I will, work on a project in the more, for a couple hours and then turn to another one. And that way I kind of feel like that is also how these stories ended up really informing each other because I was always moving between them in ways.
Love that. Love that. And I think too, I mean, we all in life, I think, can relate to that in some ways, Kelly, which makes that such a great thing. I want to say for those who are just tuning in, you all are listening to Conversations Live, watching Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm Cyrus Webb, joined today by Kelly Sather. We're discussing her journey to writing the book, Small in Real Life. As you guys can see there, I'm going to let you guys know how to get your own copy of the book and stay connected with Kelly. Kelly, I want to talk about fear for a second because fear shows up in this book in several ways. I think in the stories. I'm curious though for yourself because as you were talking about in writing this, and then of course having a friend saying, "I think you have a book here." Did that bring any type of fear for you? It's one thing to do something you love when it comes to writing stories, right? I think a lot of creatives, we just love doing what we do, right? Did it add any extra pressure on you to think about, okay, now this is going to become something else?
Yes. That is a yes. I think that I think that it's so exciting to have this opportunity for these stories to be published as a book. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
just it's a dream and I
Yeah.
am so thrilled. And then the other side of it too is like for those of us that have questions of worthiness and is this good enough and all of those things, once you realize, oh, it's going to be in a store, on a shelf, in a library, like how is it going to read, outside of this room or outside of these writer friends who are reading it. And I really relied on friends. I really relied on. I did have a moment like when the book was picked up, I sent it to a friend and I said, please read this. And does this, do I need to edit the whole thing? There's something called the developmental edit that is more of it's more of like reworking the manuscript. And I was concerned, like, does this project need it? Even though I had spent years on it, right? Like, even though I had spent all that time, it is this funny experience of just double checking. I don't really think it's second guessing, because that's not what it feels like. It's more understanding as you move into different, like, sort of a bigger readership, like, how is this going to feel at that point? And so then I'm really thankful for, for the friends that read it and said, this is ready, this is ready, you're ready. And that is something that's carried me through. I really haven't had any doubts since then. I've just sort of showed up with the book, and it's been terrific to talk to people about it.
I want to talk to you about something I thought about to ask you, and I don't script this, as you can tell, but I do, when I'm reading things, I make mental notes, and then, of course, when having a conversation, typically the author doesn't see me at this point, but I'm glad we have this opportunity for us to see each other. But I want to talk about Venice for a second, and the character Robbie there in the glass factory, because there was something interesting when I first read it, and again, as a creative, my mind, I'm reading the words, but I'm thinking about the creative process and us as creators. So I want to ask you about that, because there was a scene that you wrote in that chapter of Venice with Robbie in the glass factory and Robbie's father. Basically, Robbie saying, they're going to, turn it into nothing again. And Robbie's father saying that's the point. I wanted to ask you about embracing it, because of what you just said, actually, Kelly, and that is about, these are stories that have been with you for some time. Have you gotten used to the idea of yourself as a creator, as someone who can turn something into nothing?
That reminds me of this terrific book that I used to read to my kids. It was about, I think it was like Joseph and the coat or something like that. And he was reduced to like a button. Like, he had this coat, and then it would get worn out, and then he would turn it into a sweater, and then he would turn it into a vest, and then he would turn it in. And so then he got down to the button. And I think that the reason why I think about that is, as a creator, I don't think about it as much. I think it's a wonderful way to help me make sense of experiences, and also to have like a bit of separation. And so I might be experiencing something, but I'm also thinking about, wow, this is kind of a funny thing. Like, it's a horrible thing, but it's also kind of a funny thing. And so that has given me, just in terms of like experiencing my life, this nice sort of space in ways. And I think that the creator moment, as you mentioned, is sharing it, right? Like, oh, I get to create all these things in my mind, and then put them on paper, and then move the sentences around and the words around. But then when others read them, like, what is that experience going to be like for them? And then how will that be like all around? And I think that I have been more comfortable. I think there is some aspect to publishing work that is about being an artist that has surprised me, that I didn't expect. Not so much like, oh, now I'm an authority. I don't feel that way at all. It's really in the sharing. And I think that I'm learning more about how making art, like, I feel like art's really important to everyone, and like that people get to make things in different ways. And I think we all are in different ways. And so sometimes in sharing the stories, it's more like connecting with people in their artistic sense too, like whether or not they're writers or readers. I mean, I've had the chance to share the book with some people that don't read that, they're not like reading a lot of fiction. And that's also been really interesting. And feels like an opportunity for me to feel what it's like to share my work.
Love that. Last thing I want to ask you about, Kelly, and we're going to let our audience know how to stay connected with you, is that the idea of letting go, right? Because again, you did live with these stories for so long. You've gotten to know these characters. Now you're discussing them. They're becoming real to us now too, because we're reading the words and getting to have these conversations. Are there any characters you've created in small and real life that you would like to revisit in another work?
Interesting question. I have not thought about that. I've heard of story writers say, "Oh, I started a story and it turned out to be a novel," and that has not happened to me. But there is a story called Red Bluff that I have toyed with working on as a screenplay, as a starting point for a screenplay, because I just found it really, it has sort of it doesn't take place in the 70s, but it has sort of that 70s film vibe that I really like. And so I have toyed with that. Yes.
Awesome. Well, it gives us something to look forward to. Again, everyone, Kelly Sather has been our guest. Small in Real Life is her new book. You guys can see it there. It is, of course, available through our friends at Amazon.com. You all can be able to get your copy there or wherever you buy your books. If they don't have it, I know they'd be more than happy to order it for you. Kelly, really appreciate the time. How can our viewers and listeners stay connected with you?
So I have a website, kellysather.com, and I also am on Instagram at KL_Sather.
All right. So definitely make sure you guys stay connected with her. We will be tagging Kelly as well. Kelly, really appreciate you stopping by the program today and looking forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you. And thank you for the chance to have a little on-air time. I haven't done this so far. It's been really fun.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And we thank your audience for tuning in to Conversations Live and Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, make sure you guys make today amazing. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.